It would be impossible to imagine a more erudite group of scholars, with specialties ranging from anthropology to zoology, but all masters of linguistics. J.R.R. Tolkien, an inventor of languages himself, was on one of the later committees. These men, and regrettably because of the time they were all men, were experts in Sanskrit, ancient Hebrew, and Latin, readers of cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphics, but above all they were passionately devoted to their own language, English. The first committee estimated that the project would take no more than 10 years to complete and would fill 4 volumes. In reality, the dictionary was initially completed in 1928, over 80 years after the first proposals were made, and instead of 4 volumes, it covered 40. I refer to it being initially completed because the fact is, it never was finished and never will be. The editors of what would come to be known as the Oxford English Dictionary realized that since language is always growing, changing, and adapting, no dictionary is ever finished. The fact that the greatest linguistic minds of the day could so monumentally underestimate such a task hints at the complexity I mentioned above, not just of the English language, but of language itself. We can theorize about words and how they work. We can task the greatest minds with listening and outlining and defining them. We can analyze the structures we use to put them into language, but in the end, the way words work is an inexpressible mystery. Almost without our awareness, they do their thing, lighting up the neural pathways in our brains. We use words to define other words because words are all we have, but ultimately they are only clumsy bricks. Words are, in one sense, beyond words. Even the simple ones are often indefinable. Indefinable words. Words that require paragraphs and parables to provide even a hint of all they might possibly mean. Love and hope are 2 of the most obvious examples. Of course, the Oxford English Dictionary lists definitions for them, but they fail miserably because love and hope are bigger than words. Their meanings cannot be contained by syllables, cannot be fully expressed by the sounds we make with our voices. Groups of letters hint at the inexpressible. They are sounds we put to mysteries. They amaze and fascinate me. Why hesed? You have every right to ask yourself how someone could become so obsessed with a single word that they would attempt to write an entire book about it. It's a fair question. As I try to reconstruct the story of how I became enamored with the word hesed, I find that at each step along the way my memory fails me somehow. Some years ago, while working through the laments of the Old Testament, I encountered this remarkable word for the first time. I had studied Hebrew as an undergraduate at Western Kentucky University, but I cannot remember my professors talking about this word. The truth is, they probably did, but I simply wasn't listening. One of the fascinating features of biblical laments, which so captured my imagination, was the way every one transitions. These psalms begin lamenting, which is still a form of worship, and then at some unpredictable point they transition and begin to praise. This shift usually takes place by means of the Hebrew letter vav, which is usually translated and or but. It is as if the lamenter finally exhausts himself and turns back to the God he was complaining to or about. The sole exception is Psalm 88, which laments all the way to the end. In 3 important laments, Psalm 13, 69, and Jeremiah's Lamentations, the word hesed appears at this turning point. It marks the transition from despair to hope, from emptiness to a new possibility of becoming filled once more. It is as if David and Jeremiah had run out of doubt and despair, had run out of words, except for this one untranslatable word. They could not exhaust its bottomless supply of hope, and by grace it rose to the surface of their lament, transforming it to praise. Their self-centered I mercifully became the God-centered thou. The pain and frustration and anger were not wiped away, but were rather transformed by entering the world of this untranslatable 3-letter, 2-syllable word.